The Zulus were one of the very few people in African history who were able to put up a good challenge against the British, and for that they've earned themselves the names of one of the most strongest tribes in Africa today and in African history. So let me tell you more about that. Let me tell you about how they earned this name. How did they earn the respect that we all have for them now? We all know about the famous King Shaka Zulu, which this module is kind of about. But what did Shaka Zulu do for these people? How did Shaka Zulu affect these people? How did what they learned from Shaka Zulu, how did his influence benefit them so much? Well, let's get started with me telling you about that. Around December of 1878, the British declared war on the Zulu. And the reasons that they kind of justified this war was so that they could figure out certain border disputes and whatever. But the ultimate aim, because that was a cope reason that the British had, they had this many different times in British history, the real reason was so that they could protect commercial interests that they had in Southern Africa. And the Zulu kingdom was the only native force that really presented like a major threat to British natal, which was the British, I guess the part of the British posts that were serving in South Africa at the time. So, and because of this, they had two British generals to go and take care of the Zulu problem. Among these generals, General Lord Chelmsford and as well as General Durnford. Now, Chelmsford had an interesting plan. He had a plan to attack the Zulu with 3 colonies, with the central colony being aimed towards the Zulu capital. And on January 21st of 1879, General Chelmsford had made an encampment on a place called Isandlwana, which is what the battle I'm going to be telling you about is named after. It's called the Battle of Isandlwana. Now, like I said, he drafted a plan to attack the Zulus with 3 different columns, the central one being aimed at the Zulu capital. And many of the British were excited to go and engage with the Zulu, but there was nobody who was more excited than General Durnford, because this man was in his late 40s, he was around 48 years old, and had served for the British for a very long time, going from outpost to outpost, but he's never really seen any real action. And so this was his opportunity to finally jump in and see some real action, get some Anglo and Zulu action. But now, much of the British officials and people in the army were sure that British firepower and discipline would surely be too much for the Zulus, and that the Zulu couldn't handle this. And we'll see about that. But unfortunately for Durnford, Lord Chelmsford had concerns that Durnford's excitement and thirst for glory would have made him impetuous, and these concerns would be proven right very, very soon and quickly, as you'll see. And these suspicions would later be confirmed, and we'll find out why. So because of this, Durnford was stationed at Rook's Drift, in a place in western Zululand. He was stationed here just so he could look at certain border areas that were just certain border areas with British natal in Zululand. And after the first few days of them being in Zululand, both Durnford and Chelmsford, they weren't really finding any of the Zulus. They'd see some here and there, but not really a lot. And they were quickly growing irritated because they were ready for action. They wanted to fight. You know, they wanted to see something. They wanted to conquer like the European colonial ideology. I don't know. But fortunately for Durnford, on January 22nd, he had received the news that he's been waiting for his whole entire life. He led 400 of his men to Chelmsford's camp in Isandlwana. And when he got there, he immediately understood why Chelmsford chose his choice of camp. And it was because there was a lot of open plains. So any force that would be advancing towards them, they would be able to see them from miles away and be able to prepare for any attack that might happen. The Zulu threat, you know what I mean? But shortly after his arrival, Durnford received notice that there was a large Zulu force moving towards the northeast, possibly to attack Chelmsford's camp. Now, here's the thing. Chelmsford gave explicit orders to keep his 1,800 men together, just in case of an attack. Because the Zulus had no cavalry or really advanced weapons like that, only rifles that they would steal from the British. They thought that the battle or fight would be easy due to their, bigger guns and European discipline, their little European supremacy. But disobeying Chelmsford's orders, Durnford led 400 of his men to go and find the Zulus because he thought Chelmsford was a bit too cautious He thought it was just a bit too cautious, just a little bit. And as he marched northeast to find the Zulu, he found some Zulus herding cattle and then gave them chase, but they ran and vanished out into thin air. And when Chelmsford chased them on his horse to go and find where these people, at the point where they vanished, he stopped at a deep ravine. And looking into this ravine, all he could see was thousands, hundreds of Zulu soldiers. And it was a very, very scary sight. Imagine you're like chasing, imagine being him. You're just riding around somewhere in this foreign land, right? Zulu land. You see the enemy, and you go and chase them down, and then you come down and they vanish into thin air. That's like some mystical stuff, right? That's kind of scary, right? And then you go and find them, and then you find nothing but you found a ravine, and in there you find hundreds, thousands of these Zulu warriors dressed in the warrior attire, and they're all aiming spears at you. This is what Dunford seen. You can only imagine what would be going through a person's head right now. He was stunned at first, but then he turned around and started galloping away. And then the Zulus gave chase. They started to pursue the enemy. And soon the rest of the soldiers could see the terrifying sight. A Zulu force 20,000 strong, 20,000 men of these Zulu warriors charging. And from a distance, you could see that the bullhorns, they were clearly in a formation. As Dunford got back, he quickly got his men into line to start his defense. But what he couldn't see, however, was the men to his left moving through the tall grass to go and encircle his army. And the Zulus facing Dunford seemed to be coming out of the ground. They would pop out of the grass to throw spears and fire rifles at them. And whenever the British would stop to reload, the Zulus would approach even closer. And sometimes, when the Zulus would get close into stabbing spear to make fatal attacks and fatal blows with their spears made a very unbearable sucking sound, like Mortal Kombat sounds. Like, could you imagine? That's scary. You could only imagine what would be going through somebody's head while that is happening. Like that is terrifying. Now Dunford did manage to get most of his men back to his camp, but as they kept on fighting the Zulus were starting to tighten up their encirclement. The British were running out of ammunition, and as the fighting kept going on, it seemed to have been a stalemate. Dunford would tighten up his men and use their guns to kill scores of Zulus, but as they were running out of ammunition, this would prove to not be enough. As the Zulus were tightening in and closing the gaps between them and the British, Dunford bravely went into one of these gaps to protect his men, but was then stabbed and killed by a Zulu warrior. Now after this devastating defeat, the British had to leave Zululand, and for the time being, the war was over. This was the Battle of Isandlwana. And it just shows you how these African warriors who didn't even have the nice fancy guns, the only guns they had was the ones that they stole from the British, put up a really good fight. And this tactic, the formation that they used to encircle the British, was a tactic developed by Shaka Zulu, as you'll find out if you've seen the video I made on Shaka Zulu. This is just like an interesting thing, because it kind of shows how the British firepower, it was something, but against Shaka Zulu's envelopment tactic and against determined African Zulu warriors, they just weren't a match for the Zulu determination. The British would eventually end up winning the whole war, the Anglo-Zulu war, but they had to respect the Zulus as a respectable enemy because of this battle.